Race doesn't account for differences in black-white income?
No.
That can't be true, bro.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Fallacies, quote, "Some things are believed because they are demonstrably true, but many other things are believed simply because they have been asserted repeatedly," close quote.
And I
Do you
guess that
wish
makes
to
sense.
let that gloomy observation on human nature stand?
Yes.
I mean, that statement did make a lot of sense. Some things are only believed because they just keep being stated and stated and stated. And as I've gotten older, I've noticed that, well, as you get older, you just start to question things. And you're like, is that actually true? Like, what makes that true? Like, where did this information come from? You know, you get what I'm saying. You start to question stuff, and here I am questioning stuff, so.
Race wasn't the basis of slavery?
Oh, it's a simple historical matter. Slavery existed for thousands of years, as far back as there are any records of human beings. Archaeological finds suggest that slavery existed before human beings could read and write. So, what a racial difference between the slaves and the enslavers.
That's true.
That is a relatively new phenomenon. You didn't have in ancient times the ability to go to another continent and move millions of people of a different race across the ocean. So you enslaved the people who were nearby. The Europeans enslaved Slavs for centuries before they brought the first black African to the Western Hemisphere.
Okay, but so you're not suggesting, you do not wish to say anything other than that slavery as practiced in the United States was, it may have been recent, but you'd be willing to grant that it was particularly perverse and destructive because race got mixed into it at that point, right?
Race got mixed into it in the United States more than anywhere else for a very simple reason. The United States was founded, as the Declaration said, of independence, said all men are created equal.
Right.
If that's true, then the only way you can justify slavery is to say that some men are less than men.
I see.
That's true.
But in Brazil, where Brazil imported more slaves than the United States, there was no such ideology.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that at first. I'm not gonna cap. I did not know that. But if what you're saying is true, that slavery existed thousands years before humans could read and write, and that's just human nature, I guess, like asserting power over other humans, then it's no way that slavery can be racist because you would just be enslaving people who are closest to you. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But he also made a point like racism was mixed into slavery within the United States. I don't know why. Maybe he'll touch on that.
Where Brazil imported more slaves than the United States, there was no such ideology. Brazil was not a democratic country. The whole issue never arose.
I see. All right. Race doesn't account for differences in black-white income?
No, the differences between income between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans is greater than the difference between blacks and whites in the United States. Differences in income are the rule, they are not the exception.
So,
What does that mean?
looking at all these sociological studies that show a persistent gap between African Americans in income and every other form of American in income is what? Useless? It tells us things that we don't need to know? It misleads us? How would you describe that?
Wrong, I think, sums it up. It is not true. Hispanics have a lower per capita income than blacks. Hispanic households and families have a higher income than black households and families, simply because the Hispanic families are larger.
Economic facts and fallacies. A fallacy is that the current fatherless families so prevalent among contemporary blacks are a legacy of slavery, where families were not recognized under slavery. This ignores the fact that the problem has become much worse among generations of blacks far removed from slavery than among generations closer to the era of slavery, close quote. Explain that.
You mean explain why it is so, or
Yes,
explain-
why is that? What on earth is going on there? That is so counter to what we assume.
Well, first of all, the people, most people have not recognized the fact that if you go back into the 20s, you find that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks then than today.
Yep, that's definitely
you find
true.
Also, incidentally, that the blacks were had as late as 1930, blacks had lower unemployment rates than whites. So all these things that we complain about and attribute to the era of slavery,
1930s.
those things should have been worse in the.
It's crazy because 1930 was almost 100 years ago. And in terms of employment rates and income, of course, you naturally improve income as years progress because people just get paid more. But if you factor in inflation, we're not really improving more. Like, we're not really improving more. Of course, there are like outliers that are obviously outliers, and I'm not saying we can't improve more. We're saying we're not. Like, marriages are going down. It's just a lot of problems that I personally don't like, and hopefully one day we can fix. But
complain about and attribute to the era of slavery, those things should have been worse in the past than in the present.
Right.
But in fact, they're worse in the present than in the past. And I think if you want to look for a turning point, it would be since the 1960s.
And what happened in the 1960s?
Oh, you began to have not only the welfare state, you began to have the mindset that goes with the welfare state, so that there was no stigma any longer attached, for example, to being on relief or welfare.
And so, but why? Well, illegitimacy is exploding now among, it's high among Hispanics,
Yes.
and it's exploding among whites. But the Moynihan,
and man, I saw a TikTok the other day. I saw a TikTok, and it was this young woman. She was like 24, 25-ish, probably a little younger than that. I don't know. She looked around like 24. And she was going off. She was like, "Yeah, I'm tired of these older black women. They just won't get off welfare so I can get on it." And I was like, what? I was like, hold up, maybe I didn't hear this right. So I restarted the video. She's like, "Yeah, I'm tired of these older black women. They just refuse to get off welfare. We need to get on. We young single mothers need to get on." I'm like, bruh. And that joint had like 10,000 likes. And I'm like, bro, it's really a TikTok out here fighting to get on welfare. Fighting for it. Arguing, saying you're not on it. I was like, bruh. And that's kind of ties into what Thomas Sowell is saying. Like, bro, we're just breaking up the family, getting on welfare, using government assistance, and it's not really progressing us as a race.
report, when was that, Tom?
Or in the 60s. 64, 65.
When Moynihan talked about the illegitimacy rate among
Yes.
blacks, which was exploding then. So what if the welfare state changes the way Americans think?
Yes.
Why did black Americans prove susceptible to that change first?
Because they were poor. I don't think that many Asian American girls who are preparing to go off to Stanford or Harvard are going to say, "Hey, I can live on welfare. Why should I abstain?"
The free market.
Distinguish the two, race and discrimination.
Well, racism is an attitude inside people's heads.
Right.
Discrimination is an overt act taking place outside in the real world.
Okay. So
So not only with blacks, but you find the same thing with Jews in previous centuries, that part of the United States where there was the most racism against blacks, namely the South,
right.
is where black construction workers were much more common than they were in the North, right on into the 20th century. And most people are unaware that in the South, blacks were the construction workers. I remember a professor at Howard University saying that when he was a boy in the South, his father pointed to some man on the street and said, he was the first white construction worker in this town.
And so what was going on there? The racism did not, so whites could think of blacks as somehow or other separate, but they'd still employ them. Because,
yes.
because the market made it profitable to do so.
Yeah, in
That's the
fact,
point you make.
yes, and in fact, a law had to be passed to stop this because in the 20s, and particularly as the Depression got underway, black construction companies in the South using black non-union labor would come up to the North and underbid on government contracts, taking them away. And so this was very common, to the point where they passed the Davis-Bacon Act, which said that on government contracts you must pay the prevailing wage, which translated almost invariably into the union wage.
Right. So your point on the distinction
This
between
dude is smart, bro.
racism and discrimination is, don't worry about racism. It's inside people's heads. You can't measure it. There's a strongly subjective, just forget about it. Concentrate only on discrimination. And the best answer to discrimination is to let markets operate, because then people will discover, it will tend to militate against discrimination.
yes,
When people have skills to offer, they'll be employed. Whatever this notion of racism in people's heads is, don't worry about that. Is that right?
Yeah, what I'm saying essentially is that racists may prefer one race to another, but they prefer themselves to everybody else.
So they'll do what's profitable.
That's right. That's right.
Got it,
And
okay.
that was even true in South Africa under apartheid.
Man, that makes a lot of sense, though. I'm not even gonna cap. Like, that makes a lot of sense, man. Discrimination, obviously, fight against discrimination. You need to fight against discrimination. But what he just said, it does make sense. Like, you can't really measure that. So how could you fight against it? You can't worry. It's not a thing you can fight. But anyways, let's go.
That there were hundreds of construction companies in South Africa that were fined in a government crackdown because they were hiring more blacks and in higher positions than they were allowed to under the apartheid law, because that was where the money was.
Once again, race and culture, economic facts and fallacies. Race is used as a sorting device for decision making, even by people who are not racists. Thus, employers may be reluctant to hire young black males because these employers are aware of what a high proportion of them have been arrested or imprisoned, even if the employers have no antipathy to black people as such and readily hire older blacks or black females, close quote. Are you saying that discrimination, even on the basis of race, you're saying it can be rational? Mm-hmm. Do you want to suggest that it can be acceptable?
Well, that's a different question.
Yes,
but I do notice that among a group of employers who routinely check everyone for prison records, the hiring of young black males is greater than in the employers in general.
That can't be true,
Once they
bro.
If
realize,
they
That
find
can't
somebody
be
whose record
true.
is clean, they'll take him.
yes,
That's true? That's true? Ain't no way. I need to look that up. I need to look into that. If you have any more suggestions, though, comment them down below. And yeah, see you in the next one.